a record was broken on July 3rd of 1952. But records are broken every day. What makes this one so special? Well, athletes break records, companies break records, machines break records. But this record was different. So a ship left New York Harbor and crossed the Atlantic Ocean faster than any passenger liner in the whole of history. More than 70 years later, nobody has taken this record away. Not another passenger ship, not another ocean liner, not even the future. Today, we're stepping aboard the USS United States. It was the fastest passenger liner ever built, and the story behind one of the greatest races the ocean has ever seen. Stick around for the whole story. July 3rd of 1952 began with the sort of anticipation that people rarely recognize while they're in the moment. The docks of New York were crowded with workers and travelers and reporters and photographers and families and curious onlookers. Some had come there because they had tickets. Some came because they worked on the waterfront as dockhands and workers. Some had come because they sensed that something unusual was about to happen, or they read about it in the newspapers. The vessel tied to the pier certainly looked unusual. She was long and sleek and confident and unmistakably American. Her red, white, and blue funnels rose above the harbor skyline. Her hull seemed less like a floating hotel and more like a machine built for a specific purpose, the purpose of speed. Most passenger liners of the era tried to balance comfort and luxury and performance, but the SS United States certainly offered comfort. She certainly offered luxury, but beneath those features lived a different kind of priority. She was built to move, and move she did. To understand why that maiden voyage mattered so much to the people who put so many countless hours of their own lives and their work, their hands into this, we have to step backward for a moment and discuss a prize that was never really a prize at all. The Blue Riband sounds almost quaint today. You might think I'm even mispronouncing it, but the Blue Riband, R-I-B-A-N-D, is not a ribbon. It sounds like something that could be awarded at a county fair, or a pin to a particularly impressive pie, or, Babe the Blue Pig, the Pig in the City, or whatever that movie was called. The reality was far more serious. For generations, the Blue Riband represented one of the most coveted achievements in maritime history. It was awarded unofficially to the passenger liner that crossed the Atlantic Ocean at the highest average speed during regular service. Average speed mattered. Travel time alone could be misleading because ships followed different routes, and weather varied, and currents varied, and conditions varied. Well, average speed created a more reliable measurement. And because it did, shipbuilders became absolutely obsessed with it. Governments cared, newspapers wrote about it, and passengers relied on it. Ship companies also cared, and perhaps they cared most of all. The competitions became a matter of prestige. It became a matter of engineering and national pride to these people. The Atlantic Ocean turned into basically a massive racetrack. Not a racetrack marked by lanes or finish lines, but a racetrack marked by storms and fog and currents and icebergs and thousands of miles of open water. Winning required a whole lot of courage, a whole lot of money, and a bunch of innovation. Sometimes it required all three, and the race stretched back more than a century. In the early days of steamships, crossing the Atlantic was an achievement all by itself, of course. Travelers who sailed before the steam age often measured voyages in weeks rather than days. It was brutal. Wind determined the schedules, and weather determined the schedules, and luck determined the schedules. Then steam changed pretty much everything. Suddenly the ships could maintain some kind of a normal schedule. They could challenge the Atlantic rather than merely just sailing across it, hoping for the best and enduring whatever might come their way. But the competition began kind of quietly. One ship set a record, then another broke it, and then another. The pattern repeated again and again and again. British liners absolutely dominated much of this contest. German liners joined the race with remarkable success. Eventually, French vessels contributed their own engineering brilliance too. Italian ships occasionally stunned the world with unexpected victories. And the names became legendary. Great Western, Lucania, I think it was called Lucania. It might have been Lucania. But then the Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse. There was another ship that I cannot pronounce. It started with an M, and then there was the Normandy. And then there was the Queen Mary. I've been on the Queen Mary. It's docked in Long Beach, and it's beautiful. Anyway, each one represented the peak of technology during its era. Each represented thousands of workers and engineers and designers and sailors and dreamers. Each represented a nation saying, in effect, that we can build the best ship on Earth. By the early 20th century, the competition had become absolutely intense. Some vessels changed speeds so aggressively that comfort of the passengers suffered. Passengers occasionally discovered that breaking records and enjoying dinner peacefully were not always compatible. Can you imagine the messes? One German vessel earned the unfortunate nickname of the cocktail shaker because the vibrations rattled passengers so absolutely thoroughly that they felt like a shaken martini. That might have been impressive engineering, but it was less impressive when you're trying to eat your soup or drink your martini. But yet the race continued. Speed meant you were going to make headlines and you would sell more tickets and you would have more prestige and you would get more passengers. But then came the great ships of the 1930s, and among them stood the beautiful and glorious Queen Mary. She was powerful and beautiful and respected. And for years, she held the Blue Riband. She represented British engineering at its highest level. A lot of people might be shocked to hear that it held the British engineering at its highest level because it is currently docked in Long Beach Harbor and serves as a hotel in the United States. But she also presented something much larger at the time. There was this belief that no passenger liner would easily take her crown away. And many did try, but none succeeded. But then the Second World War changed everything. The ocean liners that survived the war emerged into a new world. And for a lot of people don't realize that the Queen Mary during World War II became the Gray Ghost. She had been repainted completely gray so that she would blend in better with the ocean. She carried troops back and forth. And one of her final voyages at the end of World War II was actually bringing over a bunch of war brides. I've done so much research on this ship, and in the credits today, you're actually going to see a couple of photos of me on board the Queen Mary from back when I was in my mid to late 20s. I'm wearing a black dress, but my hair was super short, so forgive the hairstyle. I had bangs. It was kind of dorky looking. Anyway. At the end of World War II, there was this world that was completely rebuilding itself. The world was moving forward and it was increasingly connected. Yet even amid that transformation, nations still carried this notion about caring about prestige. They still cared about technology and proving what they could accomplish, especially after the turmoil of World War II. And in the United States, one man had spent absolutely decades dreaming about exactly that. His name was William Francis Gibbs. And for much of his life, Gibbs had been obsessed with ships. Not just interested, but obsessed. And there is definitely a difference. You can hear all these TikTokers talking about, I'm obsessed, when really what they mean is, I'm very interested in this thing. I'm sorry, I'm never going to be one of those I'm obsessed girls. That's not me. Anyway, casual interest admires achievements. but obsession tends to pursue it. Gibbs dreamed of building the greatest American liner ever constructed and was not going to quit until he accomplished it. He didn't want it to just be merely comfortable or attractive or profitable, but he wanted it to be the greatest. He wanted a ship that would stand above every competitor, a ship that would combine engineering and safety and speed in ways that the world had never seen before. Eventually, he did get his chance. The result would become the SS United States. And when she finally sailed from New York on July 3rd of 1952, she carried more than passengers. She carried decades of his ambition, and she carried national expectations. She carried the hopes of people who had built this ship. And most importantly, she carried a challenge directed at every ship that every ship that had come before her. She challenged all of them. The Atlantic was waiting, and so was history. The voyage began with confidence, but confidence alone does not create a record. The Atlantic Ocean has a habit of humbling confident people. Many things do. It has done so for centuries, from the Vikings to the ancient Romans. It does not care about blueprints or newspaper headlines or national pride. It cares about absolutely nothing. It is an ocean. It is devoid of emotion. But weather and distance and physics can alter the ocean. Every captain who has ever crossed those waters understands this simple truth. And yet from the beginning, observers had noticed something unusual. The SS United States was moving with remarkable efficiency. She cut through the water differently than many of her predecessors, kind of like a butter knife through butter. Beneath her elegant appearance was an engineering philosophy focused on relentless speed. William Francis Gibbs had observed over time and had obsessed over the weight. If something could be made lighter, it usually was, for his engineering standards, made lighter. So aluminum appeared throughout the ship in places where heavier materials had traditionally been used. Every single pound mattered, and he knew this. The result was a vessel that looked luxurious, to be sure. And this was secretly behaving more like a thoroughbred racehorse. This isn't just some exaggeration that I'm coming up with either. Even her engines were extraordinary. The machinery developed immense power, far beyond what many people realized even at the time. In fact, portions of the ship's true performance capabilities remained classified because of military considerations. During the Cold War era, details about her propulsion system were considered sensitive information that they didn't want falling into enemy hands. And that should tell you something. Most passenger liners were built primarily as commercial vessels, but the SS United States was something a bit more complicated. She had been designed with another purpose in mind. If war ever came again, she could be converted rapidly into a troop transport, just like the Queen Mary had been. Thousands upon thousands of military personnel could potentially be carried across the Atlantic at astonishing speeds. It is difficult to overstate how important that possibility seemed in the early 1950s. We also had the Korean War going on at the same time. The Second World War was still fresh in our memory. The Korean War was rapidly building and it was definitely underway. The Cold War was deepening. Government looked at transportation completely differently than they had before. Speed was not just impressive. Speed could be strategic. It could save lives. It could change outcomes. As the SS United States continued eastward, reports began circulating that she was performing exceptionally well, and people started doing math and calculations. Journalists started comparing some figures, and maritime experts began paying attention, and the possibility grew harder to ignore. The Queen Mary's long-held supremacy was suddenly in danger. And that was no small matter. The Queen Mary was not simply just another ship. This had been a symbol. For years, she had represented the pinnacle of Atlantic liner performance. Travelers admired her. Sailors respected her. Rivals measured themselves against her. Taking her record would be like dethroning a champion that had seemed almost permanent. Yet mile after mile, hour after hour, the American liner kept pushing forward. The ocean crossing itself lasted only days. The preparation behind it lasted years. Perhaps that's why these moments matter so much. We often notice the finish line and forget the work that created it. We celebrate the record and overlook the thousands of small decisions that made the record possible. And I do mean thousands. Every single rivet, every single calculation, every test, every adjustment, all of it was present in that crossing. But then came the moment that everyone had been waiting for. The figures were finally confirmed. The calculations were completed. The result became official. The SS United States had done it. She had seized the Blue Riband. Not by a narrow margin and not by technicality, but by absolute outperformance. Her eastbound crossing averaged an astonishing 35.59 knots. Even today, that number remains remarkable if you know anything about knots and water crossings. In 1952, this seemed pretty much unbelievable. Newspapers celebrated, but only after the numbers were checked multiple times over by multiple people. Americans celebrated, and maritime enthusiasts were cheering. The Atlantic's greatest speed prize now belonged to a new champion. But yet there was another fascinating twist hiding inside the story. Many people assumed that the Blue Riband was a formal trophy handed to one winner after the next, like a championship belt in a wrestling match, but it was not. For much of its existence, the Blue Riband was essentially just an honor. It was a title and a widely accepted recognition rather than official awards. The phrase itself had roots in horse racing. It evolved gradually through public use and maritime tradition. In other words, one of the most prestigious prestigious prizes in transportation history. Spent decades existing largely because everyone just agreed that it existed. And that's kind of charming. Entire nations competed fiercely for something that was partially built on reputation, tradition, and collective agreement, without ever holding anything in their hands. You can win the horse race, but you're not going to get a blue ribbon. You get the Blue Riband. And yet the prestige was completely real. Sometimes human beings create symbols so powerful that they become as significant as physical objects. The Blue Riband was one of those symbols. For the crew aboard the SS United States, however, symbols mattered less than the accomplishment that they had achieved. They had crossed the ocean faster than any passenger liner before them. And they required no trophy, no ceremony, no debates. The numbers spoke proudly for themselves. As passengers arrived in Southampton, many probably sensed that they had participated in something kind of historic. Perhaps not everyone understood the full significance, but most people rarely do while events are unfolding around them. History often reveals its importance gradually. A newspaper clipping becomes a treasure in a little wooden box. A ticket stub becomes a keepsake. An ordinary memory becomes a story told for generations. But the passengers that day stepped ashore, and the voyage ended. The legend had just begun, and what a legend it became. For decade after decade, no passenger liner managed to break this record. No technologies emerged that could beat this. New technologies did emerge, and new ships did come out and were built, and air travel transformed the world. The great age of ocean liners slowly faded. Jet aircraft crossed the Atlantic in hours rather than days. Travelers increasingly chose speed in the sky instead of luxury at sea. And one by one, the famous liners began to disappear. Some were scrapped. In fact, many were. Some were retired, like the Queen Mary. And some became memories. But yet the record established by the SS United States endured. And that may be the most remarkable part of this story. Records are usually temporary. Someone runs faster, builds bigger, moves quicker. Eventually another challenger arrives. But not this time. Not for passenger liners. Not yet, anyway. And more than 70 years later, the ship that left New York on July 3rd of 1952 still stands atop that particular mountain. The Atlantic race that had captivated generations effectively ended with her victory. And the final champion remained the champion. Not because somebody wanted the title, but because the world itself changed around them. The contest vanished before the record ever did. And that's a rare thing in history. Sometimes a winner crosses the finish line, and sometimes the finish line just disappears behind them when they're done. And in the case of the SS United States, she managed to do both at the same time. The story of the SS United States does not end in Southampton, though. In many ways, it almost begins there. The newspapers celebrated the victory, and maritime experts studied the numbers. Rival shipping companies examined the performance, yet beneath all the excitement was a quieter realization. The Atlantic crossing itself was changing. For more than a century, the ocean liner had represented speed, prestige, and progress. Nations competed through ships. Companies competed through ships. Engineers spent careers trying to shave hours off of a crossing. But by 1952, another competitor was beginning to appear on the horizon. It didn't travel on water. It traveled through the sky. At first, the great liners did not seem worried. Flying across the Atlantic was still very expensive at the time. Ocean voyages remained glamorous, but affordable. Travelers enjoyed grand dining rooms and promenades and orchestras and days at sea. I have a couple of the bars and dining rooms that you're going to see in the credits of today's episode. It really is gloriously beautiful, some of these ocean liners back then. It's nothing at all like the cruise ships now. The crossing itself was part of the experience. You see, back then, people dressed for dinner. They danced and socialized, and they watched the horizon roll past. And they felt like they were participating in something important. And the SS United States embodied that world better than almost any ship before her. She was fast and elegant and modern, and she represented everything the ocean liner industry hoped that the future would be. But yet the future has a habit of arriving without anybody's permission. Only 6 years after the SS United States captured the Blue Riband, commercial jet service began crossing the Atlantic. And the journey that once required days could be completed, like I said, in hours. The old mathematics of travel changed overnight, and business travelers wanted speed. Even families and wealthy passengers who once loved ocean voyages wanted speed. Just hurry up and get me there. I can enjoy the luxury when I get to Paris or wherever. The Atlantic itself had not become smaller, but it certainly began to feel that way. The great liners started disappearing. It was very, very sad. Some of them, like the Queen Mary, have survived as floating museums and hotels and attractions. The era that had produced absolute legends like Great Western and Bremen, Normandy, and Queen Mary and the SS United States slowly faded into history. Their stories remained, and their photographs are still out there, and their records still remain. But the world that had created them is now gone. And that leaves us with a rather fascinating twist. The SS United States did not merely win the Blue Riband. She effectively became its final great passenger liner champion. Others would later cross the Atlantic faster. These would be specialized vessels and catamarans and experimental craft, and they would cross with establishing astonishing records. But they were not ocean liners carrying passengers in regular transatlantic service with these people trying to eat soup or drink their martinis at the same time. The contest that had defined generations of maritime competitions ended with this ship and still sitting on the throne. That makes her victory feel just a little bit different. Most champions are eventually surpassed. Most records eventually fall. Most winners eventually become footnotes. And yet here sits a ship that won its greatest race in 1952 and remains the benchmark for passenger liners more than 7 decades later. Not because nobody tried to, but because the record was impossible, because the world changed directions. And there's something deeply human about that. The people who designed the SS United States believed they were building the next step forward. Instead, they unknowingly built the final masterpiece of an entire era. They did not know they were creating the last great champion. They simply built the fastest passenger liner that they could possibly imagine. But sometimes history happens that way. People think they're building tomorrow. They're really actually creating the perfect ending to yesterday. Today, the SS United States remains one of the most celebrated ships ever constructed. Our story is not merely about speed, but about ambition and engineering and competition. And perhaps most of all, it's about a moment when human beings looked at an ocean that had challenged sailors for centuries and decided that they could cross it faster than ever before. The Blue Riband was never just a prize. It was a challenge. It was a symbol. It was proof that someone somewhere had pushed just a little bit harder and thought a little bit differently and dared just a little bit more than everyone else. So here's my question for you today. If you could step aboard any famous ocean liner in history for a single voyage, would you choose the fastest ship, the most luxurious ship, or the most mysterious ship? Why is that? Comment on the Facebook or the YouTube, because I know you can't leave these comments on any of the podcast platforms. But if you enjoy stories like this, please make sure you follow the History Happens Facebook page, because I'm going to interact with you guys far more often over there. I don't get on YouTube very often, and I do love reading your comments. And if you get a chance to leave a review for the podcast, I do love reading those too. And don't forget to subscribe. Every subscriber helps. And I'll see you tomorrow.